Hello, I'm Deborah, host of the Orgasmic Birth podcast, and I'm so excited to have you join us today as we dive deep into the transformative power of birth. Today's guest is someone who has truly rewritten her birth story and embraced the innate power within her. Amberlee J. Galea is a neurolinguistic programming master practitioner and authentic personal brand coach who brings a unique perspective to birth, mindset, and empowerment. After the birth of her son left her feeling disempowered and reflective of her own entry into the world, Amberlee made a bold decision during her second pregnancy. She knew this next birth had to be different, not just for herself, but for her daughter. Amberlee wanted to model trust in the body's power, showing her daughter that birth is something women can claim on their own terms. Through connecting with the power of her mind and body, Amberlee was able to achieve what doctors told her were impossible: 2 empowering home births. Her stories are a testament to the transformative potential of trusting, letting go, and embracing the innate wisdom within us. So join me in welcoming Amberlee. I have to say, I've been waiting to talk with you because just reading your stories has given me kind of oxytocin goosebumps. So I really welcome you and thank you for joining us.
And Deborah, I feel like truly honored. Like I feel so much excitement and bliss that I'm here today because your podcast, like listening to everyone's stories through your podcast and as well as your documentary set me up for it. Like, and I have tears of joy welling in my eyes as I share this. It's a birth that I visioned when I first became pregnant with my first child. And there was complications, and we're probably going to talk about this, that I couldn't embody that. But there was nothing more empowering for myself and my 2 daughters that my third birth got to be on my terms and exactly how I envisioned it to be as well.
So important, right? And I love that you're going to share. For many people, birth is a journey. And I'm so honored to know that our podcast and documentary played a part because that's what we're hoping. Maybe some people will reach it before their first birth so they can think about things in other ways. And I know your little one is there. So when we get to hear those coos, everybody, you can enjoy. It's wonderful to have her listening to the stories as well. So, can you take us back to your first pregnancy and think about, what was that like? How did that birth unfold? And what did you learn from it?
What I find really fascinating with my first pregnancy, there was a lot of fear. Oh, you want to come and talk? All
I
right.
love it.
I love the fact that my daughter Lathina wants to be here. You want to be seen as well. And as I was saying, there was a lot of fear with the birth of my son. And the reason why there was fear is I look at it now and there is not a conversation about birth other than a negative one. And I was working in a school environment as a school teacher at the time. And what I found is each woman would share their birth experience, but it was something horrific. And then it would be about, they'd always have to top the other with a better story. Well, this happened to me and this happened to me. And what I found fascinating is without me consciously being aware of it, and many of us aren't until we become self-aware of how we think, is I was taking their thoughts, their perceptions of birth on an unconscious level. And even if I look back at my son's birth, even the pregnancy, I recreated the story that my mother told me about my birth and her pregnancy. My mother is a mother of 6, all vaginal births, but mine was complicated throughout the pregnancy. She was sick. So what happened with my son? I was so sick throughout my son's pregnancy. I also bled throughout the pregnancy, and I didn't know this, but it's quite common for women to do that. Whereas I thought there's something wrong. And so, and I didn't realize this until after I birthed my son, that I recreated it. And my mother told me this story, and she told me, and then I'm afraid to share it. So before I share what my mum's perception of my birth was, I really want women to see that you can cancel, delete, and reject anything that I say. Your mind, this is the beautiful thing that I've learned about our mind, is that we can control what we take on. And so if you don't like this story, just say, I cancel, delete, reject this, and you move your body away from the notion that you're hearing, because when you move in, it's telling your body and your brain that I want to absorb this. But when you move away, you're like, oh, I don't want to take this on. This is something I don't want to believe. And my mother told me the story about how I ripped her in two, and that she wasn't right until she had my sister. Now, not me being consciously, and I can see you, Deborah, like going, whoa, my mum doesn't have that self-awareness that we have in society today, not the impact of our words. And my mum had told me that birth story since I was a little girl. And what I find really fascinating is, and I never share this story with my son, I share the story of my son's birth because they ask me all the time, Mom, tell me how I was born. And I tell my son that you were the chain breaker, because this is what I found. Leading up to my birth of my son, I wanted to birth him at home. But because there were complications in my pregnancy, the doctors said no. And the doctors and the hospital said that we don't allow you to have home birth unless your husband's 100% in agreement with it. And my husband was so fearful about birth. And I also want to say, on a side note, I didn't know how much control I had over my birth. I listened to anybody that was a doctor or a nurse, thinking that they knew more than what I knew. And so what happened is, the beautiful thing is, I wanted my son to be born in October, and on October 31st at 1:01 a.m., I felt a pop in my belly. I felt it and I heard it, and water came flushing out of me. And like it came out, and I was like, well, what is this? And I knew the hospital's number, and I rang the hospital and said, look, and I didn't even say the right words at the time. I said, I'm in your hospital. My water's just broken. They go, well, where are you in the hospital? Like, oh no, I'm not in the hospital. I'm not even in the hospital. And like, I was making no sense, right? I didn't take that sacred breath that we all need, because I hadn't been prepared or educated on how birth can be and how easy birth can be. And at this time, I told my husband, because I was sleeping on the couch because I was so uncomfortable. And we ended up going to the hospital, and then they said to me, look, nothing's moving. Your contractions are too far apart. Come back at 7 p.m. if nothing's moved or changed. And so for myself, what happened is, we went home, and I have to say, there's not contractions that were going through my body. I had surges, like intense movements going through my body, but they felt good. There was, and I was walking through it, and I spent the time at home. Like, one of my things is I like to nest. So I cleaned up the house, and we were doing everything. And then we presented ourselves at the hospital, and things got complicated. And how things got complicated is that they started giving me, and I was just following their instructions. They gave me Panadol because you're going to feel pain. So of course, I took the Panadol is like, what do you call it in America? It's very different to what we call it. An aspirin.
Right.
Like aspirin, Panadols in Australia is like, so it's, to relieve
Yeah, like a
pain.
Tylenol, we would say.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, I took this, and then they put me in a waiting room, and they're waiting for a ward to come. And I didn't, looking back, I understand now that I was on a time frame, like the time was ticking. They were rushing me. I didn't understand that a woman's body can take up to a week to go through the process of opening up and being ready for this. And what happened is, and everybody, I'm just going to let you, you're going to see my life in a beautiful way. My husband's just come home. So Frank, it's okay if you want to come in and get what you need to get. Okay. But, and Deborah asked before, the reality is you're going to see my life in such a beautiful way. Anyone watching this on YouTube, it's that I have my kids with me. I live with them every day in and day out. This is how I love life. And this is birth is giving me permission to live life the way I love it. And so my husband went to sleep, and I was good. Like, the surges were fine. They were moving through my body. I was understanding. Okay. Then what happened is they moved me into ward number 3. I remember it was at 3:33 in the morning. And then they said that they needed to induce me. This is taking too long. They were concerned about the baby. And this was 3:33. So this is over 24 hours later. And what happened is they put that drip in me, and it felt like I've never felt anything like it in my entire life. It was like an electric shock going through my body. I vomiting, it was overwhelming. I didn't want any drugs. Next thing they're giving me gas, and then that's how I chose it. And then what happened is I was screaming in so much pain. I said, I need an epidural. Like I've never felt anything like this in my entire life. And what happened, and I'm grateful for it, is they put the epidural in me, and it was about 12, what was 3:33. So at about 3 o'clock, I had dilated, I'd relaxed, and everything was going fine. Well, then they were telling me that I needed to push because my son was crowning. I didn't understand too. This is so important that in my second birth, I learned the vagina is like a flower. And what happens with the baby's pushing its way through slowly at a time, so the vagina can expand. And my vagina was expanding, but they had a time frame. You've been in here this long. We're concerned about the baby, but there was nothing wrong. If you looked at the entire process, heart rate was, I think she can see Dad. You're going to come and say hello to Deborah? This is my beautiful husband.
Hi, Deborah. Hello.
It's
Thank you so
wonderful to
much.
meet you.
You too.
Thanks, Frank. I appreciate you. And so it was, they said, look, the baby's not coming out. We're concerned. And as I was saying, it was my heart rate that was going everywhere, but my son's heart rate throughout the entire thing was where it should be. And of course, I wasn't aware of these kinds of things. And so what happened as a result of this is that they said, we need to use forceps to get your son out, and we have to give you a episiotomy. And yet I'd still look at your face.
Oh my goodness.
Like all of these things. And of course, I hadn't educated myself, and I had no one that could teach me about birth. And so, of course, they're the doctor. I trust them. Let's just do what they say. And I still remember looking at my husband's face, because I felt not the incision, but I felt the blood. And I saw my husband's face, and it dropped, like his chin dropped to the floor, like, oh my goodness. And for myself, I started like looking at it and not understanding what was happening, because I'm still under the epidural. And then I remember my son coming to me and looking like he was an alien. And it was because, and I look at that moment, he put him on my chest and he took his first breath. But I remember sitting in that hospital bed after my son was born, conflicted because I've been told birth was this powerful process that allows a woman to own her voice and embody, and let go of her maiden woundings and step up in such a beautiful way. And for myself, I was looking there going, but this is not what I wanted it to be. And I was in so many tears for days. And I know after my daughter's third birth, I sat and did 21 days of Ayurveda journey inside the bed, on top of the bed, around the bed. And I cried so many tears that I didn't express, because after my son's birth, I couldn't even walk. But what I did is I found a pair of beautiful pants that I could put on my body that pulled everything up. And I just kept going and kept running from what that birth was. And I didn't think I would want any more children after that experience. But the beautiful thing is, 2 days after my son was born, my sister lives overseas, and she got me to Skype. Remember the days of Skype?
Yes.
She got me to Skype her, and I saw her 2 children together. And I saw how much that they loved each other. And I thought, I need to have a sibling for my son. And in that moment, I didn't understand in that decision that everything was going to change and be a completely different birth with my daughter. And what excites me, would you like me to keep going?
Yes, please keep going, because Yeah, the one, I just want to say, and people that are listening don't see my expressions, but I'm really sorry to hear, I can hear the disempowerment and the pain really that was caused to you. So it's wonderful to hear that you did find a place. So take us now into your next birth. Like what motivated you now to maybe prepare in different ways?
I feel like my greatest motivation was my daughter. I found out I was having a daughter, and that's when I realized that, and I'm going to allow myself to feel these emotions that I'm feeling because I'm so proud of myself for what I've done too, is as soon as I found out I was having a daughter, and that was about the 10, 12-week mark, because I did the Precept test that we have here in Australia, I realized there had to be a different way. I couldn't allow her, because what I realized is in this time, I'd recreated the birth that my mum told me. And I said, no, there has to be a very different way. So that's when I found neuro-linguistic programming. And what I love about NLP is it teaches you the power of your mind. It teaches you that you can create the birth that you want. And I also decided with this birth is that one of my friends, she was a hypnobirthing coach. And I didn't even know this. She went to high school with me. And before I conceived my daughter, Lathina, what happened is my body chose to miscarry. And I think it's really important to the listeners and everyone watching is that I intentionally say that my body chose to miscarry, because no woman chooses to miscarry her baby, but my body chose to miscarry at the 9-week mark. And I lived my life through social media, and I wrote a post. I remember writing this post. I wrote, I've woken up today with blood, and I feel like this baby's chosen to leave me. And I had this amazing response from women of coming in and supporting and saying, thank you for this conversation, because I started a conversation that not many women have. And my friend from
Yes.
high school reached out to me and said, talk to the baby, talk to it, talk to it. And they'd done like, I'd gone and had an ultrasound because this was in the early stages, and, they couldn't really find a heartbeat. They didn't know what was going on. And I started talking to the baby. And this is the first time. I never spoke to my son throughout his pregnancy. I did a little bit, but it felt strange. It didn't feel right. Whereas this moment made me go like, I said to this baby saying to me, I said to her, I said, can you tell me, what is it you want? Not what I want. What is it you want? And she said, I've got to leave, Mama. Got to leave, but I promise I'll be back. And what happened is, as soon as I started crying and said, you got to do what you got to do, my body released all the blood from released everything that was there. And I found this tiny little sack and I picked that little sack up and I buried her. And I said, I know you'll be back. I know you're going to come back. Well, when I found out I was pregnant, it was on my husband's birthday. And then what I found out is the due date was my deceased mother-in-law's birthday that had died like a year earlier. And she gave this baby, gave so much hope to not only me, but my entire family, like my husband's side, and gave so much hope about this. And so I started this principle of talking to the baby, talking to her, and where I'm coming back is that friend that said to me, she said about she was a hypnobirthing coach. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to invest in a coach, because by this time my mindset had changed as well. And mindset had changed about the power of investing in someone to help you create what it is you want. And this beautiful woman that has changed the trajectory of my life, and it was called a birthing script. She said that you can actually create the birth that you want. And that blew my mind. I was like, what? And she said, yep, you can't pick the date, you can't pick the time, but you can actually write that birth down and read it out every day and listen to it. Well, read it out and listen to your words as you say it. And so I thought, you know what? I've got nothing to lose. And what I know is the power of our conscious mind, our subconscious, which is running the show, is before it's when our brain states are in our subconscious, like when we can change how subconscious thinks, is just as we wake up in the morning and just before we go to sleep. So I started listening. Oh, I did two things. I started reading out this birthing script and I recorded it on an audio. So I started listening to it as well. So I was programming my subconscious, and your subconscious is your body, to respond to this. Now, I also decided that I'm going to birth her at home. Remember, I told the hospital that I was choosing to birth my baby at home. And they said, based on your previous history, we are not going to allow you to do that. Well, this isn't a completely different woman because I'm choosing to change the trajectory for my daughter. I said, well, that's very kind that you say that, but you know what? I said, I don't want my birth. I'm choosing not to birth at the hospital, and I don't care what you say. And I fired that doctor. I fired the hospital. I fired the doctor. And then I went and found a team that believed in me. And I found a team of midwives that home birth in Melbourne, Australia, where I was living at the time. And one of the older women there said, you know what? You've birthed a baby, you've carried a baby, you did a vaginal birth, there is no complications. You can birth this baby at home. So I was so grateful. I found a team that was supporting me to what I was creating. But then there was a little bit of a loophole later on with this team. And I feel like it's really important to share, is that I learned that I wanted my daughter to take the first breath on my husband's chest. Now, when I discussed this with my midwife team, there was this was the older midwife. She said, that's impossible. You can't do that. That's, yeah, I know.
Why?
It's like, why? Like, exactly. Like, there's nothing is impossible. But do you know what I did? I was so in my power, I fired her. I told her, you don't get to be at my birth because you don't believe in my vision. And I read my vision and I said this to my midwives, this is what I'm choosing to create. I said, I don't care if you have doubts about it, but I don't need to hear your doubts. And then that's when I made the conscious choice that my husband became my doula. So I told the midwives at my birth that they weren't allowed to talk to me. They had to talk to my husband, and then my husband would talk to me because I trust my husband wholeheartedly. So the birth happened, like, this blows my mind away. The birth happened exactly how I envisioned it to be. So I recreated, and I understand it now, my water breaking because I'd seen that in movies. But what I've come to learn is that your water's not meant to break so soon in the process. It's meant to happen fine, like later on. So I had written into my script with my birth that it broke while I was birthing Michelina in the pool. And then I wrote that I would wake up in the morning, well, it was in the evening. I would wake up in the evening, and what would happen is I would feel a sensation in my womb. I'd go to the bathroom and I'd release my bowels and I would wipe myself, and there would be my mucus plug. The only thing that's different is that she chose to come in the morning, like early in the morning, like when I woke up rather than the evening. But when I wiped myself and I went to the after I went to the bathroom and I wiped myself, here's my mucus plug, and my bowels had released. And so what we did is we made the atmosphere dark. I walked through my house and overcoming my fears. And what I mean, at one point my head screamed, I need an epidural, it'd be so much easier, let's just do an epidural, like at one point. And then I was like, I had to talk to myself, no, it's okay, we trust the process, let's just let go, let's just surrender. And what happened, which is so interesting because I look at the contrast between my third birth, I kept going to the toilet. I just keep sitting on the toilet, that was where I felt safe. I just wanted to sit on the toilet. And what happened is, it was 7 a.m. and my daughter was born at 7:59 p.m. It took 12 hours for me to go through that process and relax. And we ended up in the water. And I wouldn't say it was painful, but there was intensity. And which is interesting because my second child, my daughter, my firstborn daughter, is very intense. I wanted to roar throughout this entire birth. And there was one point in there, what happened is she's my EnCaul baby. And my husband had to rip open Like she was coming out and in and out. Like this is what she was doing. She was coming in and out. And my husband had to rip open her sac and release the waters. And I was so adamant with this birth, and I had it in my script, that I didn't want her waters to break until the perfect moment. And she was like, as my midwife said, she's a mermaid, like born in a mermaid purse, because he had to rip it open. But yet I share this because what was happening is she was coming in and out, in and out. And my husband knows timeline therapy like me. And he took me through this powerful journey to the future of me holding my baby, because I couldn't just surrender in this moment. And I saw my beautiful little girl with her big brown eyes. She looked just like my husband, and it's exactly how she looks today. And she said, "Mum, you got to let go. You've got to let go. You've got to surrender. I'm not coming out until you let go and surrender." And she held my hand and she said to me, "We are strong. We are powerful. We are Wonder Woman. We can do anything." And what happened is, in that moment, I came back to myself and I said, "I'm strong. I'm powerful. I'm Wonder Woman. I can do anything." And my daughter, straight out, like out, completely out there, and straight into my husband's arms. And my husband was holding her. And after the birth, the midwives said to me, there was two of them, and they had 25 years experience between the two of them. And they had said they'd never seen an umbilical cord as long as the one that was on my daughter. And it was because I read that script every morning and every night, and my body was responding to it. And what I love is, and I didn't understand this at the time, is that I lost a lot of blood. And that's something that my family does. So it's really important to have a conversation. Like, birth is taboo in my family. Like, they don't talk about it. I'm one of 5 girls. I find it crazy that I'm the conversation starter about birth. But after I had this conversation, I found out that all my sisters after birth lose a lot of blood. And that they were really concerned, like, what's happening with me? Like, I'm losing a lot of blood. And my son, who was at the birth running around, like he was running in and out of the room and so excited, he told me, he whispered, "Mummy, the baby needs milk. The baby needs milk." And as soon as my daughter latched onto my chest, the bleeding stopped. But what I find remarkable is the midwives were concerned, so they sent me to the hospital. So I spent my time in the hospital after my daughter was born. But what happened is I met probably 25 different midwives. So in Australia, we have midwives that are there, and I was there for a total of 12 hours. And what happened is the midwives kept coming in to meet me, because the other midwives kept telling them to meet me because they'd never seen a woman not lethargic, not tired, not worn out, but just energized by her birth. And they wanted to meet me because they'd never seen anyone that had birthed a baby at home and on their terms. And I also feel like it's important to share on this, is that when I turned up to the hospital, the midwives provided a letter and said about I was bleeding, and they just wanted them to monitor me for 24 hours or 12 hours. And I remember being on the hospital bed because they didn't know where to put me. They didn't know to put me, they didn't know to put me in where the babies had been born. So they left me where they birthed the babies. And I'm so grateful for my husband in that moment and myself. I was lying on a table. They had my legs open. They were trying to figure out why I had been bleeding. They wanted to know, like, what's wrong, what's here. I had 3 nurses around me. I had a doctor in the middle of me, like trying to figure this out. And they were wanting me to go under anesthetic. And they were wanting to go inside me and find out what was wrong. And I remember, I can't remember, and Deborah, I know you talk about it on your podcast, and my husband had it. Like, it's there's a certain procedure that we ask certain questions. What is it?
We ask them the benefits, risks, alternatives, right? So that we
Yep.
fully understand and can make a good decision.
Thank you for reminding me of that. And I did that, and my husband did that. And they were still trying to pressure me to go under anesthetic. And I said to them, "What is it going to do to my breast milk?" And they had no answer. And I said, this is the decision I'm making. And this is like healing me in this moment, saying this out loud, because I didn't realize how powerful it was, because I felt disempowered in my first birth, and my daughter brought me back to the hospital. There's no mistake that I could say to those doctors, no, this is how it's going to be. I said, I'm going to feed my baby in my hospital bed, and you're going to monitor me and make sure everything is okay. And then in 12 hours, we're going to assess this of whether I need to be checked. Well, within 12 hours, I was out of that hospital.
Yeah. You were
And I
so
realized right now,
connected to your body and your baby.
like that. But it was so, I'm standing right now, and this is why I'm so great. Like, I'm rushing. I feel immense joy in this moment, because I didn't realize that my daughter needed me to go to that hospital so that I could feel empowered from this moment, because I believe what's happened throughout my journey of witnessing things is, and I've witnessed other women, is the hospital can be very disempowering. And it stops us from going into the role of mother, because we seek outside ourselves what they believe is true, yet our body, our innate knowing knows what's right.
Yes. And we hear it in you, right? You learn to really trust your voice and really stand up for what your knowing was for you and your baby. And I think that's what birth is, right? Birth is stepping into that. So take us now, like you decide to have another baby after this. And what was that pregnancy like? And was there anything now you still wanted to do different? Did you want to manifest in a different way?
That's such a great question. Well, first, I feel like it's important to give context of this beautiful baby. I always thought, well, I never thought 10 years ago, if you told me I was going to be a mother of 3, I'd be shocked, because I had so much wounding around the role, like that childhood I grew up with. And I was so worried that I would repeat the same patterns. So I remember being a young child saying to myself, I don't want children because I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be like my mum. I don't want to be like my dad. I don't want anyone to be exposed to the things that I grew up with. And beautiful transformational journey happened where I came to this place of having 1 and then 2. And then my third child came from this place of my husband and I are facilitators of plant medicine, and my husband went away for a plant medicine retreat. And there was this download, go on your phone, go on your phone, go on your phone. And I was like, no, I don't want to be on my phone right now. Like, I delete the apps deliberately every weekend so that I'm not on Instagram. It's, you need to go on Instagram. It's like, okay, all right, I'll go on Instagram. Then what happened is the first post I saw at the top was one of my friends, and she just had a 3rd child. And I started crying. I knew there was a baby talking to me, saying, hey, mum, I'm here, but I just kept pushing it off and ignoring it. Well, I sent a message to my husband that he's on this plant medicine retreat. And I said, look, when you go on your next journey, can you just check in about, is there a baby that's wanting to be in our life? And he said, I have been sitting here for 30 minutes trying to figure out how I can talk to you about having a 3rd baby, because this 3rd baby came to me and said, I'm ready, Dad, let's go. And what happened is, okay, that's right, it's time. Like, let's start the process of this happening. Then what happened is, what I've come to learn now is my body chooses to miscarry before I have children. It happened with my son, it happened with my daughter, and I had 2 miscarriages. And with this one, I said to Frank, I can't do this anymore. I can't put my heart out there. I don't want to do this. And he's like, okay. And so I woke up feeling really sick, like really sick, and my head wasn't clear. I woke up one day really, like it felt like I had the spicy sea, like my brain was foggy. I wasn't thinking clearly. And then what happened is something said, go do a pregnancy test. All right, I was like, okay. Well, I did 3 and I was pregnant. And in theory, I shouldn't be pregnant because my egg wasn't released when it was meant to be released, and it just shouldn't happen. And all these things like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I just chose to meditate. I chose to get still and tune in. And this beautiful baby came to me and said, it reminded me of a time that my husband and I fell pregnant, and I chose to no longer have that baby because I was scared. I was led by fear. And it showed me those moments of me going through that process and really regretting it because I was in confliction. I didn't know I was capable of being the mother I am today. And she said to me, it's time to choose me, Mum. I've come back because you have to choose me now. And I started crying. I was like, I choose you. I choose you. I choose you. Now that pregnancy, oh, it brought me down on my knees. I was so sick throughout the entire pregnancy. I had vertigo. There were days that I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't even do my responsibilities online. Like I couldn't do anything. I was very good at vomiting. And what I love about it though, is what I understand now is I was vomiting out toxins. Like I'd have dreams about things in my past and I'd wake up and I'd have to go to the bathroom and vomit. And then I had to surrender and trust. And what happened is, when I was vomiting, everything else was coming out. Like I would soil myself and I'd be okay with it. I was like, you know what? I've just got to let everything go. And I understand now that was in preparation for how she was choosing to be birthed. I just had to let go, surrender, trust. There was days like I had to let go of my hustling and grinding and just really look at like what brings me joy in this moment. And my joy was my kids. It was like, I just want to be immersed in them. I just want to be around them. And so, I would be days I just lay on the bed and then I'd be reading the books and we'd be laughing and playing. And also something was so important for me. Like I love to walk. So it was about getting out into nature, but it changed like even how I ate, like my food. But it's interesting because I'd struggled with eating disorders my entire life. And now I no longer have any problems around food. Like this pregnancy was, like I said, I was expelling everything that no longer served me. And my mother-in-law once told me before she passed away, I'd shared about my struggles with food. And she told me, you just need to have kids and then you forget about yourself. But she was right. Like I didn't realize like it was no longer about me. And these pregnancies was allowing me to just let go of everything. And this pregnancy also was, we had one doctor's appointment throughout it. I had friends that had done wild pregnancies. And I was like, what is that? And they're like, well, you just birth, there's no doctor's interaction. There's no one, you just trust your body. So I never went to a doctor. I went for one test because for my husband's sake is the Precept test. I knew everything would be all right. But I also knew, Deborah, that I was making this choice to have a wild pregnancy. They also needed to support my husband, what he needed. So I asked him, what do you need to feel safe throughout this pregnancy? And he was like, well, I just want to make sure that the baby's all right. So we went for that one test. We had no ultrasounds, no testing. I just trusted my body and felt her movements. And what I like between the contrast of the first pregnancy versus the second and the third is the third was I had no one telling me how big the baby was or you're going to have a big baby. I remember in the first pregnancy, you're going to have a big baby. It's going to be a complicated birth. So it was fueling this vision that I wasn't aware of. Whereas I removed myself from everyone. And then if people wanted to share their birth stories, I said to them, look, I'm really excited to hear your birth story, but please share it after I've had my baby. I really
love that.
That. And then what I also did, Deborah, is every day I'd listen to 2 of your podcasts.
Aw.
I really made sure that was like the only non-negotiable in my day leading up to it, is that one day I had this download. It was about 23 weeks. And I was like, you're going to have an orgasmic birth, right? So this is what I did. I Googled orgasmic birth and you came up. Yeah. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to watch this documentary. And I watched your documentary and I was blown away by the way that these women were birthing their babies. I was like, okay. I said to myself, what's the things, I tuned in, well, what do I need to create this? It was listening to your podcast. And what I did this time is and I can share this with this video with your people too, is I made a video because I know that we have to see things, we have to feel things and hear things. And so I made a very simple video of where I had myself speaking into this video of the birth that I was creating. I actually got one of your beautiful videos of birth from Instagram and downloaded it, put my audio on top of that. And so it was like a 3-minute script that I was watching every morning and every night, seeing these women empowered through their birth. And every day I would be crying tears, knowing in my body that this was the birth I was going to create. Well, with my beautiful daughter, I got to a point where I'd had enough. And I was like, okay, she's got to be out. This is what I said. I've got to be out. And why I love this is I made peace with the fact is because there was still some fear. What is this birth going to be? What it was? There's no one here. Am I going to recreate my son's birth? Or is it going to have that sort of intensity that I felt? Because there's a lot of pressure with my daughter, the second birth. And I said to my husband, okay. And intuitively it said, let's go on a bumpy ride. So we went on a bumpy ride to this little beach that we know, and we were bumping along. And then we went to the library with my kids, and my husband came back to collect us, and he said, because I was so sick, I couldn't even drive, Deborah, like throughout. So he came and collected us from the library, and I said, I'm really hot and I feel like vomiting. He said, maybe you're going to give birth today. I was like, no, it's not going to happen today. And this was like about 2:00 in the afternoon. Well, I came home and there was an eagle outside our house, a huge eagle. And
That's beautiful.
yeah, like there was an eagle outside our home, and I didn't think anything of it until days after she was born. And there was an eagle there. And what I find really fascinating is I have a small dog, and my dog was following me everywhere. And I was like, what are you looking at me for? Well, then what happened is I felt fluids come outside myself, and I was like, okay, here it is. And I went and wiped myself, and here's my mucus plug. And what I love is that my kids were with me and my daughter was with me. And my daughter is 3 and my son was 6. And I got to educate them. This is your mucus plug. And they were curious. They asked questions. It was wonderful. And of course, I do what I always do. And I started nesting, cleaning up the house. I was like, well, we need to clean up. Well, I live in a renovated shed. So we needed to clean up this shed and clean up the shed and get everything ready for birth. And so we were cleaning up and preparing everything. And I feel like it's important. Well, not everybody can see it, but there's my birthing altar over there.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I created an altar
Yes.
that was, and I'll share a photo of this later, an altar to my birth. And I went into the bathroom and I mopped the floor. And as soon as I'd finished the last thing, my water broke. It came out of me. And I was like, okay, well, I decided, well, how am I going to feel good in this birth? And I wanted to put makeup on. I wanted to put some mascara on and, do these little touches. And then at this time, I asked my kids, they were going to watch TV because I felt like it was easier for me if I knew that they were occupied by television. So they were watching the television. And funny enough, my daughter asked for Frozen. And they started doing that. And then what happened is things started getting closer together. The surges were closer together. I could feel them. And it was so different this time. There wasn't an intensity to them. They were there and I was trusting them, and I was rocking back and forth. And one stage I was with my kids, just standing up, rolling my hips back and forth and looking at the time, like there was 3 minutes apart. And this was very quick, like very, very quick. And Elsa was saying, let it go in the background. And that's when I realized I'm timing this. I'm too much in my head. It's slowing
Yes.
the process. I was like, let's put the timer to the side. And this is where I got really exciting. I remember in your podcast, like we're talking about vibrators, right?
Yes.
And I was like, well, my kids are occupied down there. And I said, you know what? I want to have an orgasm through this. I said, why not? And what I love, and I learned through your podcast, like about the clitoris being the tip of, it's only the iceberg and all of it's underneath
Right.
our hip right? Like, and I was like, okay. So I spent maybe 10 minutes on the bed and really focusing on that, like on myself and enjoyment. And what was going on is that I started orgasming. Like there was these orgasms that were happening. And here's my husband getting the pool ready. And what I find really funny is I said to Frank, I need to get in the water. And my husband said, the pool's not ready. I said, this baby's coming. We need to get in the water, right? So we jumped in the water and we'd set up cameras. And what happened is he hopped out of the pool. Now that I understand it, he said, I'm going to turn off the cameras. I said, what are you doing? Don't turn off the cameras. Everything is, it's coming, it's happening, it's working. And he said, but last time it took this long. I said, it's not going to take that long. Get back in the pool with me, right? And so he came into the pool with me. And then I had this download, like, you need to contact your sister, right? So I said, well, you need to go and send a message to my sister and telling her that I've gone into birth. As soon as that happened and he came back into the pool, I started freaking out. My head said, I can't do this. It's going too fast. It's because it was within an hour, this like process of an hour. And my head was like, I can't do this. And then I said, breathe. I remember breathe. I took a breath and it was my soul, but I also feel like it was Lathina said, put your fingers inside you right now. I could feel her head at the top of my vagina.
Right.
And that instantly brought me back into my body. I was like, okay. And then I felt her moving through me and I've never felt it like this before. And I feel like the pressure last time with my daughter versus my third birth, so my second birth, this is my third birth, is the pressure was there because I wasn't willing to let go. I didn't feel safe to let go in that moment because there are other women in the room, and that was my complications. But thanks to your podcast, I remember one of the women said that she just let go and poo came out and we came out. So you know what? In that moment, I was like, we're just going to let go. Yeah. And so I said to my husband, I'm going to poo. And it's so funny because he's getting the bucket, trying to get it out and clean it. Like he's doing all this stuff. I didn't care. I was just letting it go. And I felt her move. And then another push came through and she came out and it was the ring of fire. Like I felt that ring of fire. I felt the pop. She was there. Once again, I started freaking out. And I thought, what if I tear? And one of the most powerful things I've learned is about your birth, especially to someone safe, like you trust, is that you say your fears out loud. And I said to Frank, look, I'm so scared I'm going to tear, Frank. And my husband said, baby, you didn't tear with Michelina, which is my second birth. You're not going to tear this time. And that's when I was like, I got back into my body rather than my head. And I spoke to Lathina. I said, look, Lathina, you're coming so fast. And she's like, I'm ready to come out. And then she said, but you gotta, and she said the same mantra that my Michelina had said to me. She's like, let's say it. And so I said, we are strong, we are powerful, we are Wonder Woman, we can do anything. And what happened is Lathina, she just came out.
Wow.
And I received her, and what I love, and I still see it in slow motion, she wasn't crying. She's aware, she's awake. She was on my chest. She was content. The birth was everything that I envisioned, not in the middle of the night. She wanted to come and see her sister and her brother. What I love about it is, and I feel like I'll give you an extra clip that I've given you, is that the kids came over straight away and they were like, we birthed a baby, mummy. We birthed it. We did it. We birthed a baby. And they were there throughout the entire process. I asked my children afterwards, what did they love about it? My son was that he got to help through the process. My daughter said that she heard me roar, which I can't even remember. Like she said, you roared, and I love that you roared to have the baby. My husband told me later on that my daughter kept coming and being curious about it all. Yet one of the things that my children ask every day, can you tell us our birth stories? Can you tell us our birth stories? And if I look at the journey of the three, like we were discussing before we came in here, that there is no mistakes. Like I needed to have my son's birth. And that's what I tell him. I never tell him the story about it being a disempowering story. I don't share about being, I share about the medical procedures, but I say to him that you were the chain breaker. I needed to birth you that way so that I could birth your sisters in an entirely different way. And I just feel like as I share this, and I feel so honored, Deborah, that you're allowing to hold space for me to share this, is that I underestimated myself for a long time. And the birth of my children allowed me to own the power that resides in every woman. And I'm so grateful that I've been able to share this journey with you today.
Oh, Amberlee, I have to say, I feel the tears in my eyes too. What a beautiful journey that you've had, what wisdom you've learned in the process. And to even hear you say how proud you are of yourself, like that touches me so much because you should be proud of yourself, right? Everybody who gives birth, it's a heroine's journey. There's so much depth and understanding and wisdom. So I thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for sharing with everyone today. I know you're going to inspire many people like others have inspired you on our podcast. So I know that people would love to get in touch with you. Can you share how people can reach you? Following you on social or?
Thanks. That's a great question. I would love for you to come to my Instagram account. It's always open. This is one of my favorite things. And what I find so empowering about it is that I share my journey, my life with social media. And what's happened as a result of this is that there was one particular woman that she saw the way that I gave birth to my third child, and it gave her permission to go and create the birth that she wanted. And she just recently had it because she was in so much fear. And I share this because my inbox is always open. I feel like there needs to be more conversations about this, and more importantly, women that support you in
So can you
creating.
share the name? We'll
Yeah,
put it in the
so
show
it's just
notes.
at 𝐵𝐓𝐿𝐒. That's my Instagram at 𝐵𝐓𝐿𝐒. So just as my name says it in the socials. And also on my Facebook, it's my personal page, but I'm very open and public. Come and find me. My inbox is always open.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all our listeners. We always love to hear from you. So I hope you'll send comments. Let Amberlee know your thoughts. What are you taking away? What wisdom are you birthing forward in your own life and your own birth? And we always appreciate you rating and reviewing our podcast so we can reach more people. And we hope you'll join us next week for the next episode of the Orgasmic Birth Podcast. Thank you again.